Welcome to today's episode of the AI Trailblazer podcast. Today we have a very exciting guest. He is none other than Jason Park, the CEO and co-founder at Coldcart. So without further ado, Jason, it's a pleasure to have you here with us today on the show. Let's start off with yourself. What's your background and what led you to start Coldcart?
Yeah, thank you for inviting me on, Bruce. Glad to be here. My background, I've done a few things in my career. So I started out in e-commerce fulfillment for a company called McMaster-Carr. It's one of the largest B2B e-commerce distributors of industrial parts in the US. I spent about half my time there managing warehouse operations, picking, packing, shipping, assembly. The other half of my time roughly on software and systems projects to do those physical things more efficiently. So I kind of began my career sort of at that intersection of physical operations and technology and software making physical operations more efficient, which certainly kind of came into play as I looked at starting Coldcart. I left there and I joined Bain Consulting. This was in 2011. I worked mostly with the technology industry. And the big thing that was happening in the tech industry at the time was the cloud, quote unquote. So companies, a lot of your viewers may not even remember these days, but companies used to have big giant server boxes and data centers that they would host all their data and compute on. And then Amazon came out and Google came out and centralized all of that in a way that was more efficient than any individual company could achieve on their own, regardless of size. And so with that also came the advent of software as a service and as a service recurring subscription models. And so I was helping tech companies like companies like IBM, that type of company, um, pivot from selling physical software and services and hardware to selling as a service. And that also comes up in how we approach Coldcart. And then I left and I joined Allstate, which is the second largest consumer insurance company in the US. And I joined specifically to start their consumer identity protection business or consumer cybersecurity business. I took that from zero to nine figures of ARR in about 5 years. And we also completed a substantial acquisition of another company called Informer and put those together as one big happy family that continues to frankly thrive today. And they're about triple the size they were even when I left, which is amazing. And then I started Coldcart. Coldcart really was sort of the joint brainchild of myself and my co-founder Matt. Matt had started the company Blue Apron back in 2012, and the whole idea never really made sense to me. He and I knew each other back in undergrad at Harvard, and he went and started this company, and I was just like, "How's this going to work? You're going to ship boxes of vegetables to people's apartments, and weather, and how are you just going to make that work?" And they did really well, and they IPO'd for a couple billion back in their heyday. And he and I kind of got reconnected. And I just asked him, I was like, "How did you figure out the shipping?" And what he said was basically that it was incredibly, incredibly difficult. That they had army of people on staff. They were refunding probably anywhere from 3 to 15% of their sales every day. If their spoilage rates were frankly better than a lot of companies in this industry shipping perishable parcels. And it was just surprising given how much progress had been made in supply chain and supply chain technology kind of in the sort of 15 or so years that since he started that company and when we last reconnected. And given my background in operations and technology businesses, it just never just simply seemed off there. And we just sort of started to continue to talk about this. And the thing that really emerged was that everyone is solving this problem wrong. The things that you need to do in traditional supply chain are actually making shipments of perishable parcels less efficient. So think about whether they be meal kits or food deliveries or Ozempic or Wegovy or cold chain, cold pack medications, etc. That because you have to manage cost and spoilage simultaneously, all of the traditional things you do to reduce your cost in supply chain. So you standardize, you centralize, you do everything the same way every time. That makes your spoilage go up. Everything that you do to make your spoilage go down, you put more ice in the box, you ship more air freight or expedited shipping, you have twice as many, three times as many warehouses around the US because you want to be shipped close to your customers. That all adds to your cost. And so you can only bring one down if the other goes up. And what we figured out was that if you put all these companies on the same platform and through network effects across their shipments and their data, you can bring cost and spoilage down simultaneously for the first time in this industry. Excuse me. And so for customers on our software platform, their spoilage consistently reduces from 40 to 60%, and their cost per shipment consistently reduces from 15 to 50%. And so that's the business. We've been at it since 2021, and business has done really well. We've been growing kind of 3 to 6x every year, and a number of good customers and a number of also good supply chain providers who are part of our platform, and a really strong team that I'm proud to work with every day. So it's been really good so far.
Nice. Thanks for sharing this awesome journey so far. And then you also mentioned that Coldcart helps with lowering the cost and the spoilage of perishable products through a on-one platform. Could you share like a more specific example of how exactly it helps to bring the cost down?
Yeah, absolutely. So let's picture this scenario. So, take 1,000 companies, let's say, and you have 1,000 companies. Food could be medications, could be industrials, chemicals, and let's say today they are all shipping frozen products to New York City, and they are all shipping. Let's just pick on UPS because they're one of the two largest carriers in the U.S. So they are shipping UPS because that's one of your big choices. And UPS in New York City today is running about 85% on time delivery, which does not raise any alarm bells. Your jeans are fine, your shoes that are being shipped are fine. But the challenge of perishable parcels is that as soon as a shipment delivers late, it is spoiled, it is unusable. Sometimes there's even a notice on the box that says legally, if you open this product after this date and this time, we are not liable for its spoilage, any harm that it does. And so all 1,000 of those companies are now refunding 15% of their sales because of late deliveries. And so in Coldcart's platform, that group of 1,000 companies, as our platform is shipping them, it sees in real time that, okay, this spoilage is going up, on-time delivery trend is going down in this area. So some portion of those shipments will be rerouted to ship from different warehouses around the country. Some will get increased amounts of ice and insulation put in the box. Some will get assigned to different shipping providers. It could be FedEx is the other largest national delivery carrier here in the US, or it could be a local or regional provider, or even more of a kind of courier service. And some will actually, this may sound counterintuitive, but some will actually get delayed to the next day because your options are better that next morning for reaching the same delivery date with lower spoilage than it is if you ship now, given the options and how things are trending. So usually for every individual box, it is a combination of all those factors. And that's really the key, that for every individual order, every individual box gets that level of highly customized optimization and decisioning. And not only is it that sort of level of granular customization on every box, but our customers can also customize how those decisions get made. I'm willing to spend X dollars more for better on-time delivery, or in certain temperature conditions, certain types of products, I'd rather use this type of packaging, that type of packaging, etc. So that's really the idea, and that is completely the opposite of traditional supply chain and non-perishable shipping. In fact, if you were to do that in non-perishable shipping, it would just make no sense because all the shipments would be handled the same way every time. And so that's at the very core, the gap that's been missing in this industry is the ability to do that because that's just completely contrary to how you would treat shipments in non-perishable shipping.
Right. So it's all about just trying to customize the shipping and the logistics as it gets transported in a way that makes sense and reduces
The
the
individual
likelihood
shipment.
of, I guess, refunds and chargebacks. Yeah. Okay, cool.
Exactly. All the
So,
available data, weather, temperature, inventory, timing of pickups, reliability of pickups, traffic disruptions, and there's both kind of historical analysis. There's also increasingly artificial intelligence applied to it for predictive analytics and optimizations and things like that.
interesting. So now let's talk a bit about your role as the CEO and co-founder and Coldcart. What is your day-to-day like? What is your long-term goal for the company?
Yeah, it's guess we'll start with the day to day. The day to day is it's different every day. Sometimes you say, gosh, I've had a boring job before. It'd be nice to have a boring job sometimes, but that's not why we get in this business. But I think as a CEO in particular, you are really covering all aspects of the business. You're both trying to, your role is to lead the business, set strategy, steer the business toward a vision. Your job is also to, manage and engage investors and, other external stakeholders in the business. Your job is to support and collaborate with the team. And your job is also to be a seat filler. So at any given time in a startup, you don't have a team of 100 people. You have a team of maybe five, six, seven people at an early stage. And so, where's our marketing team? Oh, wait, I'm it. Where's our sales team? Oh, wait, I'm it. And then as you start to, at least how I think about it and what's worked well for us is that as business needs arise, you do the job first. You get a very close sense of what's going to be really needed for this specific business, and then you hire someone to do the job full time who can frankly do it better than you can. And I think that's a model that we've applied as we've expanded our team as well. We do now have, a sales team, et cetera. And, that's how we really think about it. So that's the day to day in terms of the long-term vision, this is a platform that gets better with scale. We are already starting to see those benefits, even just kind of 2.5 years since we've gone fully live outside of beta. And because it's all about network effects. So the more shipments and the more customers you have on the platform, the more opportunities you have to see problems before they happen, the more places you have to reroute or kind of options you have to optimize shipments. And then frankly, the better the costs get for everyone on the platform. We are both a software platform, but then we are also a resale platform in the sense that shipping providers, warehouses, packaging companies are selling product through our system, and our system is making those purchases for them. And now we're really starting to see that those costs come down for everybody as well. And so our goal is, there are 3.4 billion of these shipments, perishable parcels, frozen or refrigerated product shipped in boxes that were delivered in the US last year. And that number is expected to increase 10x in the next 10 years. It's always kind of 10x in the next 10 years. But in this case, there's a lot of data showing that that's roughly going to be the growth. And a lot of that's being driven by pharmaceuticals, like GLP-1s like Ozempic and Wegovy that have really really become very big in the US, not just for diabetes and weight management, but also cardiovascular disease. Even they're starting to look at it for neurogenerative, condition, neuro or degenerate, excuse me, neurological conditions. We can add that part. Um, and
Okay, sure.
yeah, so as that happens, there is no reason why we can't be in every one of those shipments because the more shipments that come through our platform, the better the cost and spoilage gets for everyone. And so right now, this is a market that is plagued with system fragmentation, kind of outdated approaches, a lack of kind of interoperability. You can't make decisions like maybe I should increase my packaging costs in order to reduce my shipping costs, or maybe I should increase my shipping costs to reduce my packaging costs. on an individual shipment because your systems don't even talk to each other. They're completely siloed. And so from that perspective, you know, as we continue to become kind of the engine between brands use to ship their products and warehouses use to fulfill those products, the economics get better for everyone. And then what does that do? If we're already at our very early stage, there are customers whose costs are coming down by 40 to 50% already. And some of those customers, frankly, were bigger than us when we started. And so that curve, it's kind of evidence, I think, of how much inefficiency there is in the market. But additionally, what happens then when you do that at scale across billions of shipments, you lower the cost of doing business. The cost of fulfillment and shipping is anywhere from 30 to 50% of sales. So if you can cut that down by 40 to 50%, you are now unlocking new price points. You are now able to ship 5 meals a week to food deserts, as we call them in the US, places that are underserved by grocery stores and, where, you know, there are neighborhoods where, parents are working multiple minimum wage jobs and the children are having to heat up macaroni and cheese in the microwave, every day. You can ship 5 nutritious meals to a family like that at an affordable price in that situation. Medication deserts, there are places around the country where you don't have consistent access to medications. Now you can get those medications delivered to someone's door for an affordable price.
Yeah,
And that's really the end game of all this is an under perishable parcel shipping is an underutilized method of shipping, not just in the US, but across the world because the costs have been too high. We're showing we can bring those costs down by double digit percentages. And then what was once relegated to premium, even luxury, considered high cost goods, that delivery method can be made available, frankly, to the markets and populations that need them the most. That's really where this is going.
got it. Got it. Then, when you said earlier on that you wanted to expand more into the pharmaceutical sector, you see that there's a lot of inefficiencies, a lot of fragmentation in terms of, the different software that they use. What is your go-to-market plan to expand
Yeah,
into
so
that sector?
we think we've taken a very deliberate, our go-to-market motion has been very deliberate at every stage of this company. It has gone market by market, and it's gone from individual brands to the distribution channel. And so what do I mean by that? We started out in D2C food. During the pandemic, it was a booming business. Restaurants are closed.
Yeah,
There was a
yeah.
lot of places to get food, so everyone was shipping food direct. We lived through that and survived that as well as everyone else did, and we've come back even stronger. But we started in that market. We the idea, the strategy has been build proof points by creating great results for individual brands. Those individual brands I mentioned, are saving between 15 to 50% per shipment. That's not even in rates. That's just in things like more efficient usage and more efficient operations. The rate savings are only just starting to happen as we kind of get more scale. Create great results for those brands start to tell other brands about you. These are very interconnected industries. The other thing they do is they take your product into third party fulfillment centers or 3PLs warehouses, and those warehouse operators, those 3PLs, see those brands using your product and they get interested too. They see that, boy, those customers onboard a lot faster. Boy, it's much easier to support those customers. We don't get as many calls from those customers. And if we do, they're coming in through a ticketing system that's provided by Coldcart. That this process is much more seamless. There are much fewer SOP changes. Things happen much more cleanly and at
A
lower
network
cost.
effect.
Yes, that's right. And sorry, I thought I thought you said the network was on this. Yeah. So it's right. You're right. It's a network effect. And then they want the product too. And so now we've really, in the past, couple quarters, we've started to launch partnerships with 3PLs to make Coldcart their de facto software for perishable direct shippers. And so that's been the case in the food space, food and beverages. We are now starting to pursue that in pharmacy and healthcare. Our COO comes from the pharmacy industry, built one of the larger D2C pharmacies in the US back in its day. And we also have a very senior industry partner who is helping us open doors at some of the most influential names in the pharmacy space. It's the same thing. Work with the brands, build your proof points. Both in the US, there's an increasing number of kind of large manufacturers who are shipping direct, as well as SMBs, and then earn your way into the distribution channel, which in the case of the US, it's pharmacy benefits managers, the insurance companies who distribute a lot of prescriptions, as well as then, the retail and mail order pharmacies themselves that are distributing on behalf of multiple manufacturers and brands. That's the play, and we're early on that journey, but we've been able to, especially given the track record of establishing food, we are able to, we're really starting to gain some momentum there.
Nice. Then what would you say are some of the biggest challenges you are facing right now when it comes to the go-to-market and expansion into new sectors?
Yeah, it's interesting. I think about the last business I built, and by the end of it, we were over 100 million ARR. One of the teams I was running was marketing, and we had a $20 million a year marketing budget and a massive sales team. And to go from that to doing sales and marketing yourself, and now we've been fortunate to bring on a really great sales lead, one of the top sales reps from ShipBob for many years. So definitely brought in a real professional. So that's helped. But it's a very small team. And in many ways, the easy answer to go to market is just to throw money at the problem. Well, you don't have money to throw at the problem, so you have to throw ingenuity, creativity, resourcefulness. So you really start to appreciate the impact of small things and small steps. It's like one of our investors I talk with on a fairly regular basis about marketing and content. And, the first idea is always, oh, we could build a great program around this. It's like, okay, we could just start with one blog article and test this messaging, or we could just start with this one type of collateral or this one type of, add a section to your
Yeah.
website and build very incrementally. But it's not just about doing small things. It's about doing them purposefully, right? What results are we trying to achieve?
Hmm.
How do we know if we're achieving them? And then the more we see those results getting achieved, we adapt the approach, and then you can also put more money into it. So that's kind of at the smallest scale, but then I'll say that, that itself also expands and scales up. I think one thing, if the name of the game is really the path of least resistance in early stage go to market, for us, that now means leveraging channel partners. We partner with 3PLs, we partner with investment funds who invest in companies who are our target customers. And so they are bringing us qualified leads. It's enough to where in some months the amount of inbound we get just from our channel partners and those referrals is enough to fill our pipeline quota for a month. And those are cases where we'll share in the we share in the returns with those partners. But that's a case where you may only have one sales rep or 1 to 2 at any given time, but you are able to force multiply their efforts by engaging the community, engaging an ecosystem of partners who share an interest and have an interest in the case of the investment funds, right? We make their portfolio companies more efficient. So they want their portfolio companies to come onto our platform, things like that.
Nice. So you're saying that the main constraint is really just the lack of resources. You can't really just throw money at the problem, but then it's also not really a disadvantage because it also means you get more ingenious solutions and can test things out on a smaller scale with less risk.
I'm going to make a bold statement, but I think at this point it's true. So I have worked in and been in a leadership position in companies of every stage, from 0 to 100 million to 1 billion, and Fortune 100 even. I'll make a bold statement that I believe at this point, which is that I actually think, especially when it comes to things like go to market, the less money you have, the more efficient you are, the higher your ROI is on every dollar. A Fortune 100 company can plow millions of dollars into marketing campaigns, and they can get growth through just brute force and just by flooding the zone and flooding all the channels. But we have spent close to nothing on paid marketing. I mean, that, speaking dramatically, but our paid marketing spend has been close to zero. But for every dollar we've spent, we've gotten at least $7.50 in revenue back for it. But we don't spend very much, right? So I
Mhm.
see that with other startups as well. I saw that when I was in a bigger company partnering with startups. In some ways, the ideal state would be how can you take that same scrappiness, that same kind of lean approach, that kind of really rugged test and learn approach, and put more dollars behind it without losing that efficiency. And a lot of kind of ways we can opine on theories for that. I've got a lot of ideas, but I actually think, and I think our team would agree with this too, that in some ways, excuse me, in some ways, constraints and scarcity can be an advantage. It pushes you harder as individuals, but the people who are in a startup are the kind of people who want that kind of challenge, who don't like being put in the box and just being said, "I just followed this process and here's a giant budget." And so, I think it's really exciting as we grow. We're really thinking about how do we continue to operate this way, just with more money and more scale. Easier said than done, obviously.
Right. Okay, that's an interesting take. So I would like to go to sort of the last segment of our podcast here. What sort of shifts or trends are you seeing in your industry right now, and then how is that impacting the growth of Coldcart?
Yeah, so couple things. We started out in the food space. There were a lot of D2C food companies during the pandemic, 2020, 21. Industry is booming. There are a lot of them that didn't actually need to exist. They were propped up by venture funding, propped up, or that they were kind of, I'd call them like diversions for larger CPGs and restaurant businesses who, couldn't rely on in-store and, foot traffic the way they used to. And so that market looked really good in 2021, looked terrible in 2022, and we lived through that as well. But it really is coming back now. I think what we're seeing now is the number of prospects, and when I say prospects, quality, qualified prospects, ones that are growing. We look at their data, they tell us their volume, things like that. Ones that there's sort of the number of prospects is growing, and among the prospects that are out in market now, it seems like the quality's gone way up. So I think what you've seen is really this sort of bubble burst and like a phoenix rising from the ashes, so to speak, that the food companies who are really winning in D2C now, the ones who are here are the ones who are really winning. So that's been really good for us. I think we've seen our growth sort of mirror that. I think in healthcare, there's some really interesting trends related to perishable parcel in the D2C space, particularly in pharma. So we mentioned GLP-1s like Ozempic and Wegovy. Majority of those are shipped perishable parcel, shipped direct to patients. Drug manufacturers themselves are getting into D2C more and more. See in the last 12 months, companies like Eli Lilly and companies like Eli Lilly and Pfizer have launched their own D2C sites. And in general, kind of with the reverse of what you saw in food, during the pandemic, pharmacy really went digital, really went direct to consumer. Telemedicine increased, and post-pandemic, it has stayed that way. That was enabled by some regulatory shifts that have
Interesting.
remained in place and that will remain in place. And so more and more, you see something it's the growth of D2C pharmacy in the US was like 80% in the last 5 years and continues to grow. Of all the prescriptions filled in D2C pharmacy, about 40% are perishable parcel, which is 10 times what it is in in-store retail because as soon as you have to ship something, a lot more drugs become perishable. And then you add to that the fact that in the US, the Food and Drug Administration, the FDA, is the regulatory body that approves the launch of new drugs. In the last 8 years, the number of perishable drugs that has been approved has been more than double what it was in the previous 8 years because you look at what's going on. It's stem cells, it's gene-based, cell-based therapies, hyper-targeted, medications for kind of rare diseases, or they call them orphan diseases, not to mention the expanding use of GLP-1s. Medications are becoming more perishable. More medications and perishable medications are being shipped parcel. And the number of uses for some of the biggest, excuse me, and the number of uses for some of the biggest perishable medications like GLP-1s are actually expanding, as you mentioned, to things like even Alzheimer's and Parkinson's from their original use case in diabetes and then weight management, weight-related conditions. So that is very exciting. And then, of course, there's always AI, right? Everyone always loves talking about AI. And, we have been an AI company since the beginning. We don't go out and market ourselves as AI. Frankly, I think in an industry that is newer to adopting technology for certain things, for us to come out and say, well, yeah, you would freak everybody out, right? But, we have, our support is almost entirely automated. And, we do have agents doing a good portion of this work. Our optimization models have become increasingly predictive. And everything we do, we've been essentially self-funding training of models. I mean, that's what the people have, we've had a full staff ever since kind of we started this business. What have they been doing? They've been training these models all along, and we've been getting the data from our customers, and we've been getting paid by, through providing this service. And so you'll start to see next year, particularly next year, and then after that, we already have Coldcart.ai, the domain. We've been doing a lot behind the scenes. You'll start to see that become more and more central to our business in a public way. But we're not going to come out and we're AI for perishable shipping. A lot of companies out there were AI for this. Well, that business, that industry never asked for AI. We are solving based on what our business needs. And AI is turning out to be a pretty good solution and frankly, not just a pretty good solution, but honestly, a true breakthrough in a lot of ways. It's already enables us to scale our business a lot more efficiently than we would have otherwise at this stage. But the problem has to dictate the solution, not the other way around.
Hmm.
That's definitely the approach that we're trying to take here.
Okay, that is very insightful. So we have come to the end of the podcast interview. Jason, once again, thank you for taking the time to jump on this podcast and sharing all of this valuable insights with our audience when it comes to the perishables industry, the logistics industry, and how Coldcart is really able to try and keep the cost and spoilage down. Yeah, it's a great pleasure to have you here with us today, Jason.
Yeah, thank you so much for having me, Bruce. I really love what you've been doing with this podcast and in your larger body of work.
Thank you. Appreciate it.